Hi, I'm Kyle Scheidler with the Center for Security Policy. This is Threat Watch. This week, President Obama has convened an international Countering Violent Extremism summit at the White House. While being touted as a new program, in fact, the summit is a doubling down on a failed program based on a flawed concept. Highlighted within the summit will be the CVE programs of 3 cities, Boston, Minneapolis, and Los Angeles. The program is based on the 2010 recommendations of the Countering Violent Extremism Working Group, which included multiple individuals associated with organizations linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. Those recommendations were focused on the treatment of terrorism as a local problem comparable to gang violence, which could be solved through engagement and developing partners with local communities. Those recommendations featured Minneapolis and Los Angeles among cities carrying out what were called, quote, best practices. Those recommendations later developed into the 2011 White House strategy empowering local partners to prevent violent extremism in the United States. Unfortunately, the local partners that have been chosen in each of the 3 model cities have time and time again been shown to be the same groups who themselves are responsible for indoctrinating young Muslims to join terror groups. Take Boston, for instance. As documented extensively by the local New England group Americans for Peace and Tolerance, Boston's premier outreach partner, the Islamic Society of Boston, has been the central link between numerous terrorists and terrorist financiers. It's also connected to the Muslim Brotherhood group, the Muslim American Society, of which convicted al-Qaeda financier Abdurrahman al-Amodi told federal law enforcement officers, quote, "Everyone knows that mass is the Muslim Brotherhood." Yet following the Boston Marathon bombing, then FBI Director Robert Mueller found himself unaware of the role played by Muslim Brotherhood operatives in establishing the mosque.
A guy named Al-Amudi that I'm sure you know is doing 23 years for being involved in terrorism, also working with the Clinton administration back before he was arrested and then convicted and sent to prison for 23 years. But he started a mosque. What kind of follow-up was done on the mosque at Cambridge and the mosque at Boston, where you had a convicted terrorist that was involved in the organizing?
Indeed, it is this very penchant for bad partners that connects Boston with its fellow CVE models in Minneapolis and Los Angeles. In Minneapolis, up to 30 young Somali men have been indoctrinated and joined the fight with al-Shabaab and increasingly the Islamic State. Local Somali families have sought FBI help to locate and put a stop to the indoctrination. But the very imams with whom the FBI was conducting outreach have repeatedly stood in the way, backed up by the Muslim Brotherhood Hamas-linked Council on American Islamic Relations, which pushed a campaign urging people not to talk to law enforcement. And in Los Angeles, law enforcement officials establishing the counter-violent extremism effort did so with groups that maintained close ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. The LAPD's Suspicious Activities Reporting System, for instance, was subjected to the review of the MB-linked Muslim Public Affairs Council, which proudly announced the ability to reform the reporting system. And the LA County Sheriff, who established the county's CVE program in Los Angeles, was so immersed in dealings with Hamas-linked CARE that FBI agents urged their superiors not to notify him of a potential investigation because they felt his office could not be trusted. Having played a role in establishing Obama administration's reliance on the CVE process, MB-linked groups are now seeking to pull out whatever limited law enforcement value the program may have had by aggressively opposing even the possibility that law enforcement outreach to communities could possibly result in investigative leads that would help prevent terror attacks. They've even held recent meetings with President Obama himself to push for a prohibition against informants and retraining for any local law enforcement unit that hasn't fallen into line with the CVE standard. It should be extremely problematic when the very outreach partners designated for CVE, like CARE's Hussein Ayalosh, can't differentiate between Islamic State terrorists and the standing army of a friendly state.
I mean, there's a challenge when we trust law enforcement agency with the affairs of our mosques in terms of religious ideology, because no other religion does that, no other religious community does that. And I'm not specifically commenting on Salam's comments, but on the issue of countering violent extremism. There's a threat, there's a danger when we accept this terminology within our own community, because no other community has to deal with that. There's, you don't hear about countering violent extremism to deal with the thousands of Jewish American kids who joined the Israeli army killing people of Gaza. When was the last time the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, or the FBI approached the Jewish community to ask them to deal with this trend? Actually, there are many more Jewish Americans who have joined the Israeli army than there are Muslim Americans who have joined ISIS. So let's talk about the Jewish American kids who joined the Jewish state before we talk about, or as we talk about the Muslim Americans who joined the Islamic State.
The inability to distinguish between jihadist violence and a wide swath of behavior ranging from active shootings perpetrated by the mentally ill to criminal activities by gangs to the Israeli Defense Force is the very crux of the problem that is countering violent extremism in these three model cities. It's a strategic incoherence that has been actively promoted by groups associated with the very behavior law enforcement is supposed to be on guard against. I'm Kyle Scheidler, and this has been Threat Watch.